Hello and good morning. I'm Dr. Aquia Duku-Enoche, Associate Director of the School of Humanities, Arts, and Cultural Studies here at Arizona State University. Thanks for joining us and the MLK March on West, so-called because it usually is held at Arizona State University's West Campus in Phoenix on the border of Glendale, Arizona. This is the 31st year for this event. Very long time. We've held it every year going on all the way back to 1991. While this year's program is coming to you online this morning, the purpose remains the same: to celebrate the legacy of civil rights pioneer Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and to help better understand the significance of Dr. King's impact on our nation's history and on our lives, even today. This event traditionally hosts middle school children on campus. Sometimes as many as 1,000 students have been here to join us, but this year we are gathering virtually. We are happy to be able to perform for you and to welcome you and to offer you our educational thanks and our sincerest concerns and interests to everyone who is joining us this morning. But first, here are just a few housekeeping notes. This program is about 1 hour long. Second, the event is being recorded and will be posted on the website asu.edu/MLK. Lastly, due to the size of our audience, we won't be able to answer questions directly or even engage you in discussions as we have in the past. Our online host can see any instructions and questions that you may enter, and we will do our best to respond. So please communicate with us if you have questions or if there's anything that you would like to add to today's program. Now, to begin our program, we are honored to have soloist Mr. James Rambo Smith, also known as the Singing Fireman, to sing the national anthem. Mr. Smith is a retired firefighter, United States Army veteran, and an award-winning gospel recording artist. Please stand if you're able for our national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light was so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, who'd brought stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. O'er the ramparts we watch were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you so much, Mr. Smith. Now, please welcome to the program Dr. Todd Sandrin. Dr. Sandrin is the Vice Provost of Arizona State University's West Campus and Dean of the New College of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences. Dr. Sandrin?
Good morning, and thank you for joining us, virtually that is, here at ASU's West Campus. I'm delighted to welcome you here today to honor Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. My name is Todd Sandrin, and I serve as the Vice Provost of ASU's West Campus. Our beautiful West Campus is one of our 4 metropolitan Phoenix campuses located across the valley, but more about the campus in just a moment. Today, we are here to celebrate and to reenact what is widely regarded as one of the most important speeches of the 20th century, Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. West Campus began this tradition 31 years ago, way back in 1991, and we are so delighted to be able to welcome to our campus this year more students like you, community members, faculty, and staff every year. I'm so proud that we have today so many, actually well over 1,000 middle school students, here to experience our interactive presentations, to learn about the civil rights movement, and most importantly, to be reminded in such a powerful way that you too can make a difference. To students joining us today, your presence here clearly shows your passion and your commitment to ending racism and for making a big difference in your community and in the world. It's also clear that, like Dr. King, you also refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. You understand what Dr. King referred to as the fierce urgency of now. You understand that we must all work together to advance progress that, as Dr. King said, we cannot walk alone. In his speech, Dr. King sadly recalls the lack of progress made towards eliminating racial injustice since the Emancipation Proclamation that President Abraham Lincoln declared 100 years prior to King's 1963 I Have a Dream speech. Now here we are 59 years later, here in 2022, to say that much progress remains to be made seems like such a tremendous understatement. What kind of progress am I talking about? The progress to engage, the progress to confront, and the progress to end the systemic racism that so visibly and unjustly plagues our nation. Progress to advance anti-racism across the nation, progress to end the loss of Black lives. Now, though, is not the time for us to give up hope. Each of you has an opportunity, no, each of you has an obligation to help in this way. In fact, ASU President Michael Crow has described 25 specific ideas and steps to make real progress towards these long overdue changes. And ASU's West Campus is a place where you can thrive and begin to do that work to realize that necessary progress. We offer here more than 120 degrees here at ASU's West Campus in all kinds of world-changing majors. Some of our students study math, biology, English, psychology, or cybersecurity. Perhaps you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher or an accountant or even a scientist working to discover a cure or a treatment for a disease like Alzheimer's. You see, here at West Campus, we offer degrees and hands-on experience that can help you reach any of those dreams and so many, many more. But chances are that a few of you, maybe it's you or your classmates sitting next to you, you have a passion to make a difference, to help change the world, to make it fairer, more just, and more equitable. Well, we have a lot of degrees here at ASU that will allow you to do just that. One of those is a degree called Social Justice and Human Rights. Or perhaps you're interested in a degree in history or political science. Our graduates of those degree programs have gone on to join and to lead organizations that do the very work that Dr. King dedicated his life to. Yes, you too can make the world a better place, and you can start right here at ASU's West Campus. As you experience today's presentation, I invite you to imagine what it was like for civil rights activists way back in 1963. You'll see film of some of the actual people, some not much older than you at the time. They didn't know how it would turn out. They didn't know if it would be successful or even if they would live to see the outcome. But they had a passion to try their very best to make a difference for themselves, for their families, and for their communities. And I say for you here today, nearly 60 years later, you have that opportunity. And as you think about your future and the ways in which you will change the world, I invite you to think about joining ASU's West Campus. Thank you so much for being here today, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sandrin. And now, please welcome Ms. Jennings Rogensock, Vice President of ASU's Cultural Affairs and Director of Gamage Theater, as well as Chair of the University Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration.
Welcome to Arizona State University's 2022 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. I'm Colleen Jennings Rogensock, Vice President of Cultural Affairs at ASU and Executive Director of ASU Gamage. I am honored to be the committee chair for ASU's Martin Luther King Jr. Committee. Our theme this year is Inclusion Starts With Us, and we are so thrilled to have you with us as we celebrate Dr. King on all of our campuses. We're especially thrilled this morning that you are with us for the March on West. This annual celebration features Dr. Charles St. Clair giving Dr. King's stirring I Have a Dream speech. We know you will enjoy it, and please take advantage of the other programs we have as well on our website, asu.edu/MLK. Inclusion starts with us, and we're happy you're with us.
Thanks, Ms. Jennings Rogensock. And now we'd like to share with you the Black National Anthem. You may be surprised to know that it wasn't originally a song, but rather a poem that was written by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People leader, James Weldon Johnson. Originally, this poem was written in the 1800s, and it has been now performed as a song throughout the world. For our morning performance, we are inviting Mr. James Smith to lead us in the Black National Anthem.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven rings. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark path has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might lead us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we may be. Lest our hearts drink from the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadows beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land.
Thank you again, Mr. Smith. For just a moment, let me take you back to 1963, before Dr. King's speech and the March on Washington. All across our nation, protest and activism was bubbling up in different ways depending upon the situations in different regions, states, and cities. It was these activities that actually led to the groundwork for what would become the history-changing March on Washington in August of 1963. But to fully appreciate the moment, to fully appreciate the march, you really have to understand the groundswell that was happening all over the United States. Over the past 30 years of our event, we've offered student participants breakout sessions with ASU faculty, staff, and students where they focus on the civil rights birthplaces and landscape of unique cities across the country, as they were back in those days. For this morning's program, we offer you 3 brief overviews of cities that were involved in the civil rights movement. These cities will be presented by ASU faculty. The 3 cities include Little Rock, Arkansas, presented by Carla Murphy; Birmingham, Alabama, presented by Matt Symington; and Montgomery, Alabama, presented by me, Duku Inoche. So join me for a virtual civil rights road trip around America.
Welcome to the Martin Luther King March on West webinar. My name is Dr. Carla Murphy, and I'm here today to talk to you about civil rights, desegregation, and the Little Rock Nine. Before I get to desegregation and the Little Rock Nine, however, I want to spend a few moments talking about civil rights. In general, when most people use the phrase civil rights or civil rights movement, they are talking about events that happened in the 1950s and 60s and that led up to Martin Luther King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech. These events or protests typically took place when basic rights to things like public facilities, water faucets, watching a movie, or even just waiting for a doctor were made more difficult or even denied to people of color. But the civil rights movement really took off when people started talking about public education. See, up to the 1950s, it was assumed that African Americans would attend schools that looked like this, while white kids went to schools that looked something like this. This going to 2 separate schools thing is called segregation. And even a quick glance will tell you that these educational experiences are very different. In the picture on the bottom, we see 1 kid per desk, 1 teacher for 28 students, bulletin boards, books, bookcases, and room to move about. In the image at the top of the page, we see up to 3 people at 1 desk, 1 teacher for more students than we can possibly count, and maybe 1 small blackboard over on the one side of the room. In short, not only were these classrooms and the students segregated or kept apart, these educational experiences were very, very different, and not in good ways. So, by the time Linda Brown was to enter the 3rd grade, her parents had had enough. They wanted simply for their daughter to go to school with the same rights and number of desks as the white kids, but they were denied. So they sued. And after just about 3 years of legal battles, they won their case. Segregation was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in 1954. I won't go into all the details that surrounded this important moment in history, but I will say that the Brown versus Board of Education ruling was a key moment in the civil rights movement. But it was not the only one. Rosa Parks, Emmett Till, and Martin Luther King Jr. also hit the news. Further, television stations started covering events related to the civil rights movement. And for the first time, people around the globe were seeing events unfold live, and what they saw was unsettling. I share this background because I want to emphasize that these were some scary times, that fighting for one's civil rights was not easy, but not claiming an education was also scary. So in 1957, in the midst of hate, fear, and change, in Little Rock, Arkansas, 9 African American students enrolled for classes at what had been up to that moment the all-white Little Rock High School. The students were selected based on their strong academic standing. They were entered at every grade level. Some were freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, and there was one senior. And while they are known collectively as the Little Rock Nine, let's name them here. They are Gloria Ray, Terrence Roberts, Melba Patillo, Jefferson Thomas, Carlotta Walls, Thelma Mothershead, Minnie Jean Brown, Elizabeth Eckford, and Ernest Green. And on September 4th, 1957, with the Supreme Court behind them and dreams of integration in front of them, these 9 students attempted to go to school. What these students didn't understand, however, was that the governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus, was against integrating schools. And he wasn't alone. About 500 people gathered in protest on what was to be their first day of classes. The students also found that the Arkansas National Guard was there to prevent them from entering the school. And one poor student, Elizabeth Eckford, walked up to the school that day all by herself, only to be turned away. Unsurprisingly, the events of the day were turned into front-page news. But what folks might not have seen coming was that President Dwight D. Eisenhower was about to do something in support of these students. On September 9, 1957, he signed the Civil Rights Act into law. After that, one more attempt to integrate the school without outside assistance was made on September 20th. But the Little Rock Nine didn't make it through the day. Scared for the safety of the students, the police removed them before the final bell. The President of the United States had seen enough. And on September 24, 1957, the President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief of all armed forces, sent members of the United States Army to Little Rock. And then he federalized 10,000 members of the Arkansas National Guard to answer to him and not the governor. The 2 divisions joined forces, and the 9 students entered safely into Central High School the next day, September 25th, 1957. But it wasn't smooth sailing. The governor was still very unhappy, and attitudes didn't change overnight. The guards could not protect the 9 students from everything that happened. In addition to being spat on, the students were verbally harassed, tormented daily, and even abused. Melba Patillo, for example, was kicked, beaten, and had acid thrown in her face. Minnie Jean Brown, after months of taunts and harassment, finally retaliated and dumped a bowl of chili on a group of white males in the cafeteria. But she was the one suspended. Gloria Ray was pushed down the stairs while walking to class. And across the street from the school, in a vacant lot, some white students burned an African American in effigy. None of the Little Rock Nine were allowed to participate in extracurricular activities. In fact, only one of the Little Rock Nine graduated from Central High in that first year. In May of 1958, Ernest Green graduated, and Martin Luther King, Jr. was there to celebrate his accomplishment. Jefferson Thomas and Carlotta Walls graduated from Central in 1960, but the others all finished their high school education someplace else. Governor Faubus closed the school after that, and the remaining students transferred to other high schools or took up correspondence courses in order to graduate with a high school diploma. Nevertheless, we honor these 9 students, not just for what they did in using nonviolent means to face resistance and earn justice under the law, but because they teach us something important about what it means to be strong and courageous in the face of discrimination. And we can imagine them, 5 years after finishing that harrowing year of school, standing with Dr. King and agreeing wholeheartedly that segregation is most definitely a dark and desolate valley.
Hello, and welcome to ASU's annual March on West tradition. I'm Matt Simonton, a professor of history here at the West Campus, and I'm going to be talking to you about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Birmingham campaign of 1963. I don't know if any of you have been to the state of Alabama, but in 1963, Birmingham was its largest city. The white residents of Birmingham called it the Magic City. But in 1963, to Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders, Birmingham was the most segregated city in America. All public facilities in Birmingham in 1963 were segregated, meaning black and white people could not use them together. That meant restrooms, parks, taxicabs, fitting rooms, and more. The white leaders of Birmingham were so intent on keeping it segregated that they actually chose to close down 38 public playgrounds, 8 swimming pools, and 4 golf courses rather than integrate them. If the racist laws of Birmingham were disobeyed, they could be enforced with violence. The Ku Klux Klan and other hate groups could be counted on to back up racial segregation with terror. From 1957 to 1963, there were 50 cross burnings and 18 bombings, which led to the city having the ugly nickname Bombingham. It wasn't supposed to be like this. You may have heard of the Supreme Court case Brown versus Board of Education from 1954. That ruling overturned Plessy versus Ferguson of 1896, which had established the doctrine of separate but equal. In a unanimous decision, the justices declared that separate meant inherently unequal, and that African Americans were being treated as second-class citizens. The Supreme Court justices told governments to end segregation with all deliberate speed. What they should have said was right now, because racist state legislatures, many of them in the South, found ways to delay and ignore the Supreme Court's ruling. So in April of 1963, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. arrived in Birmingham to protest the city's unequal treatment of its black citizens. But he never worked all by himself. He had help from friends, including his close confidant, Ralph Abernathy, and a brave local civil rights leader, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth. They called their protest Project C, for confrontation. On April 4th, people began their protest. They marched in the streets, staged sit-ins at segregated restaurants, and boycotted businesses. They wanted to declare their message, but also to hit businesses where it hurt, their profits. On April 10th, just 6 days later, the city leaders declared so-called racial marches illegal. But Dr. King and his allies stood up for their constitutional rights. On April 12th, Good Friday, 1963, Dr. King was arrested with Ralph Abernathy for participating in a march. He spent 8 days in the local jail for trying to exercise freedom of speech. But he knew he would be arrested. This was his plan, to call attention to racial injustice in Birmingham. While he was in jail, reports came that certain local leaders didn't like Dr. King's presence in Birmingham. 8 white clergymen had written a letter encouraging people to reject Dr. King and his methods. Dr. King felt he had to respond, and he started to write an open letter to the clergymen, writing on scraps of newspaper that were smuggled to him by the black orderly at the jail. This letter became known as the Letter from Birmingham Jail. It's an inspiring document and one of the most important writings to come out of the civil rights movement. In writing the letter, Dr. King was responding to the clergyman's claim that he was an outsider who was meddling in local affairs. The white clergyman said that the civil rights struggle was best left to the courts and the legal system, and that marches, nonviolent resistance to unjust laws, and other forms of direct action were counterproductive, even wrong. They said that the best thing was to wait for justice to be delivered by the court system. King disagreed. He responded to the clergyman's points one by one. First, he addressed their claim that he was an outsider and had no business in Birmingham. He wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." To the white clergyman's claim that the civil rights leaders should be patient and wait for the courts to give them justice, King also had a response. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. We must come to see, with one of our distinguished jurists, that justice too long delayed is justice denied. In early May, after Dr. King was released from jail, he and other leaders started the Children's Crusade. Hundreds of black school children, many of them your age, took off from school to peacefully march through the streets of Birmingham. Children were going to make clear to adults the injustice of their system. May 2nd, the first day, called D-Day, ended with 700 people being arrested. But the children of Birmingham didn't stop. The next day, 1,000 children participated. Then something happened that shocked the conscience of America. The Birmingham Commissioner of Public Safety, a racist man named Bull Connor, ordered his policemen to turn fire hoses and vicious dogs on peaceful children. These harrowing photographs taken by news reporters were published in national newspapers and showed Americans the brutal reality of Birmingham's racist segregation system. Through the painful sacrifices of black children and students, public opinion started to change. That's the context for the speech you're about to hear, the speech I Have a Dream, delivered by Dr. King at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in August of 1963. The Birmingham campaign had paved the way for Dr. King's forceful demand for full civil rights. I'll leave you with a quotation from Dr. King, words that still ring true today. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away, and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. And in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty.
Hello, my name is Sister Rosa Louise Parks. I was born in Tuskegee, Alabama, and many call me the mother of the modern civil rights movement. They think that I just started then, but in fact, I have been involved in the movement for years, myself and my husband. I remember that fated day, December 1st, 1955. You know, I had been working for a long time. I'm a dressmaker, and I was so tired. When I boarded that Cleveland Avenue bus, I paid my fare and sat in the colored section in the front. Not long after, the bus driver ordered me to move for a white man, but I refused. You see, this song was ringing through my head. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around, ain't gonna let nobody. And at that very moment, I decided I was not getting up. In fact, there were other black riders who did move, but I refused. And so when the bus driver signaled for a police officer, he came, he drugged me off the bus, he arrested me, he handcuffed me, took me off to jail, and gave me a fine of $10 plus $4 for carrying costs. That was a lot of money in those days. Soon after, in fact, that evening, many people in my church and around the city came together and decided they had had enough as well. And so they decided to have the first Montgomery bus boycott. On December 5th, the day that I was to be tried in municipal court, they began the boycott. The majority of the city's bus riders were black, and they boycotted that system starting on December 5th. Later that afternoon, black leaders decided to come together and they created the Montgomery Improvement Association and elected Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as their president. They also decided to continue that boycott until their demands were met. Actually, on June 5th, 1956, the Montgomery Federal Court ruled that any law requiring racially segregated seating on buses violated the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. How happy we were. Even though the city appealed, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the lower court's decision, and the Montgomery buses were integrated on December 21st, 1956. That boycott lasted 381 days, but we were successful. Now you may wonder, why is the Montgomery bus boycott so important? There are a number of reasons that I can share. It's most likely the earliest movement that was started on behalf of civil rights in the United States. It set the stage for additional large-scale actions outside the court system to bring about fair treatment for African Americans, which is what we wanted and what we needed. It is credited for the emergence of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And he became a prominent national leader after that time. It brought national and international attention to the civil rights movement that even continues to this day. I remained active in the civil rights movement long after the Montgomery boycott, and my husband and I left Alabama for Detroit, Michigan, because there were so many threats of violence to us. But we continued to work. I was even invited to Phoenix, Arizona during the time of the activists were working to adopt the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday here in Arizona. I truly believe you must never be fearful about what you are doing when it is right. Each person has to be responsible not only for their own lives, but for the lives of others. I would like to be remembered as a person who wanted to be free. I wanted not just for myself freedom, but also for other people as well. I know someone had to take the first step, and that's why I decided not to move. Well, thanks for joining us on this road trip. Now I would like to turn to the moment we've all been waiting for, the I Have a Dream speech performed by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963. Today, we are inviting you to join with Charles St. Clair, faculty member at ASU, who will be giving his rendition of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I Have a Dream speech. Welcome, Charles St. Clair.
50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negroes who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end a long night of captivity. But 100 years later, we must face the tragic fact that the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of an American society and finds himself an exile in his own land. So we have come here today to dramatize this appalling condition. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our great republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of liberty and pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. So instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity in this nation. So we have come here today to cash this check. A check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit paths of racial justice. Now is the time to open the doors of opportunity to all God's children. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment and to underestimate the determination of the Negro. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there's an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who had hoped that the Negro would need to blow off steam and will now be content and return to business as usual. There will neither be rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But there is something I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let's not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to distrust all white people. For many of our white brothers and sisters, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny, that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels and hotels on the highways of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied. And we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like mighty water and righteousness like a mighty stream. I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. So go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina, go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana, go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, that in spite of the difficulties and frustrations of the moment, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day the red hills of Georgia and the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a desert state, sweltering with the heat of injustice and oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream today. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day the state of Alabama, whose governor's lips are presently dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, will be transformed into a situation where little black boys and little black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and little white girls and walk together as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and every mountain will be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith with which I return to the South. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightened Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous peaks of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and every molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. When we let freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we'll be able to speed up that day when all God's children, black men, white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
How does anyone follow that? There's simply no words. Thank you, Charles. Students, that was the speech that inspired a generation and still lives on as a beacon for us all today and beyond. Now, before we go, we have one more performance. Welcome back to the program, Mr. James Smith, performing the always stirring "We Shall Overcome."
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We are not afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We walk hand in hand. We walk hand in hand. We walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. God bless you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And now we'd like to return to Mrs. Rosa Parks, mother of the Civil Rights Movement, who would like to ask you some very important questions. I'd have some questions that I'd like for you to think very carefully about, and how you can follow the tradition of people like myself and Martin Luther King Jr. First, how do you want your classmates, your friends, your teachers, and your parents to think of you? Are you respectful of others regardless of race or creed or religion? Do you stand up for those who feel alone or friendless? Do you use kind words like thank you? Do you listen to other people's concerns and thoughts? Do you make decisions based on what is right rather than who you like? These are all important questions I'd like for you to reconsider, and I want you to think that race may differ, but you can still respect everyone. Thank you.
We